Okay, right, well, I'm going to go through this presentation really quickly just to introduce the ECR network and what we do. And obviously you're not here to hear me talk, so I'll try and make that brief, and then we can move on to kind of the main event, which is our main event for today, which is to talk about how to forge successful collaborations with industry in the public and private sector. So if you were at the last event, you know that we asked for feedback at the end of that to see what you guys wanted to hear about next. And the most upvoted, or the most common choice that came out of that was an event on industry collaboration. So this event has come straight from what people actually wanted to see. And similarly, after this event, we'll do a similar vote to try and find out what you might want to see at the next event that we put forward as a network. Okay, so coming up today, we've got some amazing speakers for you who have had great careers and done some really great collaborations in the public and private sectors themselves. So I won't take away from their talks by telling what they're about to start off with, but we'll start off with a few talks from more experienced colleagues, and then we're going to have a panel session after that where you sent some questions in to us and on kind of what you wanted to know about industry collaboration, and we've put together a panel session of those questions. And also, if you want to ask any more questions at any point during that panel session, you can also kind of just send them through the chat as well. And then just to finish off the session, we'll be doing hopefully a little bit of networking if we've got time, where you will get to meet each other, which is nice because at the last event we didn't get to do that. So it'd be nice to see some faces and get to know who are the ECRs in the UK and beyond. Just a bit of housekeeping for within the event. So if you can just keep your microphone on mute during all of the talks, that would be great. We don't mind you having your video on at all. It's up to you whether you want to kind of smile and nod along, which I like to do. But it's totally up to you what you're comfortable with, really. If you've got any questions during any of the actual talks, please just pop them in the chat. You can write the question in there yourself, but sometimes I find when I'm writing the question, I miss half of what's actually being said because I'm trying to word the question coherently. So if you just want to ask the question yourself at the end of the presentation, just write your name or just say, I have a question, and I'll come to you at the end of the talks. Okay, so I hope that's clear. But again, if you're not comfortable asking the question yourself, I'm happy to read out your question from the chat box also. If you've got any questions about the OR Society, please just contact me or Carol or Hannah after the session, or anyone from the OR Society. Basically, if you can just keep your questions about the talks today, that would be great. And if your question in the panel session is for someone specific, then just let us know, okay? And you can let us know in the chat if you've got any problems during the call. So I can see most people have been able to access the chat. I'm seeing lots of nice messages coming through about where you're from and what your positions are, which is great to see. Okay, so a little bit about us before we actually start off the session. So this event was organised by the ECR network. The origins of the network were that a couple of years ago in 2018, we had an ECR workshop, which was the first kind of event that brought all the ECRs together under kind of the umbrella of doing some training. And that was all about like how to write a grant. And at that event, that workshop, we kind of discussed this idea of creating a network run by ECRs for ECRs. So that's how these events are popping up. Basically, you tell us what you want to hear about, and we try and design an event for you that actually meets those needs and starts a discussion really about what ECRs actually want. Because I do think it is, I'm an ECR myself, personally, a hard part of thing to go through when you're so unsure of a lot of things. So I don't think I actually introduced myself. So I'll just say a second. So for a second, I'll just say I'm Lucy Morgan and I'm from Lancaster University, and I've been a lecturer for 2 years. So I'm definitely an ECR myself and working out how to go go through all these similar things to all of you. So the aims of the network are mainly about peer support, and we wanted to basically create somewhere that you could ask questions, feature work, and actually also celebrate ECR accomplishments. So if you haven't already joined our LinkedIn group, you can join that and try and get involved in some of those activities. We also try and, through the LinkedIn group, push out information on ECR appropriate training events and workshops. These aren't just workshops held by the OR Society, they are wider UK-based workshops on research events. For example, there was recently an event on joining the ECRs with Parliament, and that was something that we promoted through our site. And through the ECR group myself, I found out about a group on cardiovascular modelling. So which I went to and was actually really nice because it's led to another piece of research work that I'm doing at the moment. So it's just a place to come and find information and get some more contacts, basically. So yeah, please do join us on LinkedIn. I can see that Carol's posted the LinkedIn group link within the chat group if you want to find it there. We are currently looking for committee members. So over the last 6 months, we've actually grown considerably, and it would be great to have some more people to actually talk to about what kind of events we might want to do in the future. Some of the advantages I've recognised is that kind of get to influence what events we run, contribute to a nice strengthening an ECR community, trying to create a community for us here through this kind of forum. Kind of get to hear about interesting opportunities really quickly when they come through, thanks to Carol, who sends me lots of opportunities that are then put on the group. And I get exposure to a wider community of ECRs working in my field. So through this, I'm actually getting to talk to a lot of you, which is really nice and I see as a great opportunity. So if you do want to help us maintain and grow the ECR network, and that's something you're interested in getting involved in, please just send me an email or Carol an email, and we'll have a chat and see where we can take that. It'd be really nice. So, okay. So other ways to get involved. So you could join us as a committee member. You could tell us what you want the next event to be about, join the LinkedIn group, or you could follow the OR research Twitter account. So we don't specifically have our own Twitter at the moment, but maybe we will soon. Okay. All right, and then the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about before I hand over to our speakers is a survey that we'll be asking you to fill in at the end of this session, but I want to tell you just a little bit about that first. So the OR Society have been working recently on a pipeline survey of ECRs to see, which universities are teaching operational research at the moment, and what are they doing, and is it undergraduate, postgraduate, etc. So today we've got a slightly different survey for you to fill in, if you don't mind. It's very quick to fill in. It's just all about like what you're working in personally, and what kind of areas of OR did you do? What did you do your undergraduate degree in? What did you do your postgraduate degree in, etc. Just to kind of see how people are actually filtering through the system of education and coming up to this point of being early career researchers in operational research. And that will be helpful in a number of ways for the OR Society to kind of understand how people are joining operational research and potentially where funding is needed, etc. So we hope that you've got time to fill that in at the end of today's session. And it will be I'll talk about that right at the end again, and we'll post a link at that time. Okay, right. So, I think I'll leave that one to the end. So I'll stop sharing my screen now. I'm just going to let our first speaker, Miguel, share his screen.
Okay.
And we can kick off from there. So.
Is that okay? Can you see the screen?
We can, yes, thanks very much.
Okay, good. I want to have this on as well. Yeah, I'd like to at the same time have the videos of people who are actually here at the same time. So it's nice to see faces and know that I'm not talking completely to a black hole. Thank you to those who have turned on their videos. I'm Miguel Angels. I'm Chair of Operational Research at the University of Edinburgh. I think I can move this out of the way as well. That should be better. And when Lucy asked me to present on this topic of collaborations with companies, I started having all sorts of ideas and lessons or experiences that I've had working with multiple companies in different countries. And at some point, I came up with this idea of putting together what would be my utopia in terms of how to collaborate with a company. Okay, so this is completely unreal, but this is what I certainly would wish for, and I think everyone in this call would wish for. And then the question becomes, how can we move towards that? And that's where I think the interesting part of this utopian idea comes from. So what is this collaboration about? Well, first, we're going to just imagine that there is a company called Dream.org, and that within this company, Dream.org, there's a person called Exist, and Dr. Exist has an important business need within Dream.org and recognizes that OR can provide a solution. Now, what happens then? Well, not only does Dr. Exist know about OR, but also knows about me and knows how to contact me, which nowadays is not so hard given the internet, but this was an issue not that long ago. So now this person knows how to contact me. And not only that, the company has already put aside a budget for a large effort of whether it's research or consultancy to help run a project to help them with this need. Moreover, this is a company that is very well organized when it comes to data, and it constantly gathers, curates, and updates all the data relevant to their activities. And therefore, all this information is available to carry out the OR project that they're looking for. Moreover, this is not an off-the-shelf solution. We have to do some research and come up with some novel ideas, and then we can take the time to develop these ideas and come up with what would be a perfect solution for the needs of the company. And then finally, we are allowed as academics to publish all the results and the outcomes of this work. Now, I think that for everybody in the call, you realize that this is unfortunately very far from reality, but there are some important points here that I've tried to summarize. In starting with the first line, notice that I've written Dr. Exist. Ideally, we would be dealing with people who understand what doing a PhD is, what being an academic is, what research at that level is. That's not necessarily the case. So that's sometimes the first bridge, is to bridge between the reality of companies and the reality of the university. And then, of course, there's questions about how do you even know that you should be talking to an OR person? How do you get the project funded and so on? So let's talk a little bit more about some of those. How does it actually happen when we get to the real world? One of the things that happens a lot in my experience is that when people are faced with an OR problem, often they will think of talking to their IT department. IT has this catch-all feel to it that if you're looking for a solution that involves what we call OR, it somehow falls under the umbrella of IT. Now, IT covers a lot of things that are not OR, but the difficulty is in really establishing our identity and making it clear that this is different from the general idea of an IT solution. And that oftentimes there is no off-the-shelf IT solution anyway, and you really need to think in terms of applying the proper techniques that in many cases come from OR. Even if there is a recognition of OR within the company, it's important that there is a champion for OR and for whatever you want to do within the company, right? Somebody has to really be there to say, this is what we should do. This is the person or the organization or the company we should work with, and the university we should work with, and to really just at every step of the way keep pushing forward this collaboration. of course, one of the questions is, how do you identify such a champion? And that's one of the questions that I think we'll be talking about later. But it is important to really find such a champion for things to be successful. Then there's the question of funding. How do you get the funds necessary for carrying out an OR project? This can be difficult for a variety of reasons, either because the company actually doesn't have much money to dedicate to it, or else you have to compete with other needs and justify the value that's going to come out of that funding for the company. Data is a really interesting one. It's actually, unfortunately, in my experience, surprising when you talk to people and they actually have the data. Most of the time, they say things like, oh, yes, we've got some spreadsheets somewhere. We've seen that. We don't know really where they are. And there's lots of holes and things that don't really belong there, and information that's clearly wrong, and so on. So data is definitely a major issue in terms of carrying out a successful OR project. What can be done about it? Well, you have to start with wherever the company is at. So the question then is, how do you manage to identify within the company the right people who have access to the information, and try to get as much information as you can, and if necessary, motivate the fact that you actually need to spend some time just gathering data in collaboration with them to be able to complete the project, not necessarily before you start doing other things at the same time, but make them understand the importance of having this information. I think that nowadays we talk about data science enough, and about machine learning and artificial intelligence and so on, that a lot of people understand the value of data and the importance of data, but you still have to get your hands on it and the right data, and that's not necessarily simple either. Then there's the question that usually by the time they get around to talking to you, they want a solution now. So you have to be realistic about how long do you actually need versus how long will they be prepared to wait. And this is a balance that can also be a little bit tricky to carry out and to figure out in practice how to pull it off. But it is, again, an issue important to keep in mind, that in academia, we think in terms of months and years, often when we do research. In companies, you think in terms of hours and days. So very different time scale. And this is where one of the tensions can come from. Then there's the question of, well, if we're in academia, we're into the business of publishing. What can we publish? How can we publish it? And what are we allowed to make available in the public domain? This is, again, an issue where you need to really think about from the start and try to motivate the fact that, at least in the kind of OR that I work in, and I think in much of OR, there's actually a certain amount of information that we can, enough information that we can publish to get a practical publication out without giving away the secret sauce that makes things work for the company, and without giving away competitive information. But whether the company agrees to that and how you can come up with a compromise in that regard is far from trivial as well. Nevertheless, experience, at least in my case, tells me that we mustn't give up. And it's certainly very fruitful when it works out. We can discuss, I won't touch on that, but we can discuss later whether industry collaborations are a desirable thing, but I've been assuming that they are. So if that's what you believe in and that's what you want, don't give up on this yet. I think that one of the things that is very important is to advertise OR at every opportunity. And one of the ways to do that, to start, is to join the OR Society that is working in that direction. I'm actually a member of different OR societies in different countries as well. But this is one way to push the advertisement of our area. At any opportunity that you can talk to people, even if it's just in some kind of event that you happen to have a chance to attend and to talk to people in a company, tell them about OR, tell them about what you do, and call it OR. At least that's my opinion. But then put it into words that are communicating what it's about from that person's perspective. how do you meet these people? Well, network, network, network. And the important thing here is to realize that, yes, there are a lot of events and opportunities that are fairly obvious in some sense that it's worth attending, and hopefully they bring about useful networking. But sometimes contacts may come from very unexpected places in unexpected ways. So the general idea is, if you have the opportunity and you have the time and you can afford it, go for it and just meet people. And you never know where that may lead. Sometimes you'll just come away and think that was a complete waste of time. It happens. That's just reality. But much of the time you can actually get something beneficial out of attending some event and getting to know more people that are in some way connected to what you do, because that's why you're there. Another important point is to know the value of your time and of your expertise and respect it. Don't do too much work for free, right? You've worked hard to develop your expertise and to get to where you are, and later on in your career where you will be. It's important to show the value of your work and show what you can do, but at the same time to also not just give it all away. So there is some trade-off to be found between giving a little bit of advice to show that you can actually help versus just giving away too much and giving away the value of your expertise and of your work. Touching back on data, as I've already mentioned, I think it's reasonable to say expect difficulties with the data. It used to be maybe not enough data. Now I think it's becoming too much data, and finding your way through what is the data that's actually relevant for your need. So this is something to start talking about as soon as it feels appropriate, to just make sure that you can actually go forward with the project and deliver in the end. And then one last point, do be enthusiastic about the projects that you're talking about with a company and that you want to carry out. Do show that you care, that you're really interested, that you want to do it, and that you can make a difference. But at the same time, you have to manage expectations. You cannot promise everything for tomorrow. In fact, you mustn't promise everything probably, because there will be things that may be very challenging to carry out. So be enthusiastic, be positive, be really interested in doing things, but at the same time, don't overpromise, and certainly never overpromise and underdeliver. Now, how do you do this? There's no magic recipe, but certainly by thinking carefully about things, by planning, by talking to the company multiple times and getting enough information that you feel confident about what you're getting into, is part of the way that you can make some progress in this direction. And having said that, that's all that I have to say at this point. We'll have lots of time to discuss other aspects and any questions that come up. But I think we can stop the presentation here for now, if that's okay, Lucy.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. I don't know, I think there's reactions and things like that, but I'm just going to have a minute to, if you want to unmute and just give Miguel a clap for a second. So that was a really interesting presentation. I'm going to give people a few seconds to
Thank you.
add anything to the chat if they want to. But I'll start off with my own question whilst we wait for that. So one of the things I was thinking as you were presenting there was, do you ever do like a period of almost like courtship with a company or a collaborator to work out whether there is a fit there for you to actually understand their problem and whether you can contribute to it? And if so, it seems like that bit would also have to be funded. So it seems like a bit of a grey area of almost, I don't know, yeah.
Yes, no, that's a very good point. There are a lot of gray areas in this. That's one of them, and that's one of the pieces where you do have to invest enough time to get to know enough with the company and talk with the company and get a sense of what you can actually do. How much time you're prepared to invest, in some sense, is up to you, and how much time does it take becomes dependent on the case as well. I don't think there's any simple rule about that. the only thing that comes to mind is to say you have to feel that you've put enough time, that you think you've given it a chance, and that you really are confident about making the call of, no, this is really not worth pursuing, versus I'll just hang on a bit longer and maybe it'll work. And how do you make that call becomes very subjective from one's perspective as well. But definitely there is a certain amount of courtship that has to happen just to get the communication going and to get the two sides to understand each other. In some cases, it depends on what the expertise is in the company. In some cases, if there is already someone who is more or less a natural champion, then that person can do a lot of the convincing for you. And that saves time and can move things forward much more quickly. In other cases, you have to be patient and you have to start from scratch. But if you feel that it's worth it, it's an investment. And when you make an investment, you hope that it pays off, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think that's just the way things are.
Okay, yeah. I want to know where these champions are. That's great.
Yeah.
Have you some contacts to these champions? That would be great. I think we haven't had anything yet in the chat. I did have another question though. So, one of the things that I personally found is that sometimes when there isn't somebody that understands operational research necessarily guiding the other side, that the problem isn't that well defined, or they're not really sure what the problem is, but they know what the end goal is that they want, but not really a well-defined problem. How do you deal with that kind of scenario?
Well, then part of what you have to do is somewhat help narrow down and define the problem. And then we get into also the question of, are you the right person to work on it? Or is this really someone else's domain? Is this some kind of team effort that you need to pull together? In many cases, again, this is something I think we can talk about a bit more later, and some of the others may touch on. You're not a one-stop shop that has all the solutions to all the problems that companies have. You have your own expertise, you have your own experience, and then that's what you bring to the table. And if that's not the right fit, then to me the question becomes, what is the right fit, and guide the company towards the right person or the right people to talk to. And in some sense also mentioned that it's often hard to find one person who's going to have the whole solution, and so you may have to create some kind of team to pull together the necessary mix of expertise. So again, it's a matter of be open to possibilities, be open to opportunities, and just in that sense, networking even within our own profession is important. Events like this that you're organizing within the ECR is very important, because you get to know other people who are at similar stage in your career, who know other things that you don't. And then one day, if you happen to come across an opportunity where actually I need someone who knows simulation, for example, and I know nothing about simulation, but I know who to talk to if I need someone who knows simulation. Same thing, for example, for organizational behavior or soft skills in OR, or some other areas that for me, I know they exist, but I don't really know much about them. But I know who to go talk to when I need some of that expertise to bring in. So that's another important reason for networking, not just with the outside, so to speak, but even within OR, to keep this networking activity alive and well.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, okay, yeah, thank you very much.
No problem.
Also think one of the things that I found helpful actually is to put myself on the OR Society Researcher database, because that's somewhere you can find people with different skills that are in slightly different from yours, even if they're in the same discipline. For example, in simulation, I know me and Kathy work both in simulation, but not in the same area. So it's a good place to find people. So
that's very useful.
Highlight that.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So we'll thank you again, Miguel, and
no problem.
We'll get ready for our second speaker now. That's Kathy. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to share your screen, Kathy?
Yeah, this is the point that I probably share my shopping trolley instead of the presentation slides. Let's see.
No, we can see them.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so I have no idea how long this talk takes. So if I go over my time, you've got to kind of give me a 5-minute warning. And I can't say that every collaboration I've had has been completely successful, but that's all part of the journey, and that's how you learn how to do them. And in starting this, I want to just say to everybody who's turned up today, well done for coming to this particular event. We're at the point that we're facing one of the biggest challenges with this pandemic, where we've got more than, at least in this country, more than 120,000 dead. And I'm smiling, but I shouldn't really be smiling because it's horrific. So many companies have gone under, and all of you are vibrant, you've got fresh ideas, you've got unique skill sets, you're just what all of these organizations need right now. They need your expertise. So to some extent, it's not, I don't think it's going to be too difficult for you to make these links. And I think you've got a huge amount to offer. So I'm not going to hold back in saying you've absolutely got to try your best, even as part of our efforts as a society and as human beings to help. This is where we can help. It's our calling card. We've got to kind of do it. So I'm just going to say a little bit about myself. Why do I do these collaborative projects? Well, I like to feel like I'm making a difference. It's really important to me, and I think having a set of values, and I wish I'd started off my career with values, because I can't say that I started off with values. I've acquired them over time. But I think it's important to know what you want to do. Do you want to help other people? And if you do, like I do, then this is the right direction. And in my mind, the two things like being an academic, contributing to research at a more theoretical level doesn't mean that you can't help practice. The two can marry and you can still publish. So any kind of nonsense that you can't get into good journals if you do very practical work, that's not true. And now with impacts in universities, when they're looking for these impact studies, this is how you would get one. You'd have to actually work with a real group that actually need your help and where you can make a difference. So I noticed in one of the questions, I had a quick look at all of the questions, and one of them is, how did you start? I actually had a brilliant undergraduate experience where I modeled an assembly cell in manufacturing, and I fell in love with simulation, and that was it. That we were kind of married at that point, and I was only ever gonna do that. And then my PhD was very applied. So how did I get my PhD? I actually walked along, because that's the sort of person I am. I walked along to, so I was in the business school, and I walked along to the Center for Health Service Studies, which was a long way, because somebody said, oh, they have a lot of practical problems. I just knocked on doors and I said, oh, I'm thinking about doing a PhD. I've got funding. Do you have any problems? And somebody said, yes, we do. And he was a geriatrician, and he'd got this funding, and we did this really exciting project. So really, you just have to be audacious and just go and knock on doors, and you never know what can happen. These are a few of the kind of organizations I've worked with, and some of these are with PhD students, with RAs, always with someone else, because I'm the sort of person, I love working with other people. I love the where you can like bounce off each other, where you can have a moan. It's boring. I hate working on my own. So for me, it's always with other academics or early career researchers and stakeholders. So I've picked two to talk about, because one fits with the sort of private sector, and the other one fits with the public sector, just to give you a little bit of an idea. So I'm not going to say a lot about the previous one. So the first one was with Eurostar, and that was meant to be a little bit longer than a year, but it only lasted a year because the person doing it actually had done all the work, and he's a brilliant modeler, and he got a different post in Australia. So it was a knowledge transfer partnership, but I wasn't actually part of the original people setting it up. But one of the people that did set it up left, and I took that person's place. And actually, it went completely into my area of interest, and I was kind of one of the main academics with the RA supporting it. There is an article in Impact about this particular collaboration if you want to look at it, and we are publishing. So we're submitting papers. We've got one submitted, and we're going to submit another one very soon. We've just got to shorten the paper a little bit. And the person I worked with, so the RA, he was a KTP. I don't know if you know a lot about KTPs, but they are part funded by Innovate UK, and then the organization pays for a lot of it as well. So this RA was really embedded in the institution. You have to have a lot of support from senior management in the organization for this to go ahead. So you have regular meetings, they're quite important. You have access like you can't believe in these when you have a KTP. It's not like other collaborations, and this is why I wanted to highlight it, because I feel that if you do have a company and they are interested and they want to provide some funding, this is the way to go. And as I said, that one of the key things is the support you have from senior management and the amount of collaborations that they can enable through this support. So we had a lot of workshops with groups of stakeholders where they helped us understand the system, and then we built simulation models. So we built simulation models for the different train platforms for the rail network, and we helped them prepare for Brexit, but unfortunately the pandemic shut down the entire operations, and Brexit was absolutely not important in the last year. So with the public sector, this is a recent one. I thought that was quite interesting because I was approached for this one from my institution. So the Kent Resilience Forum, so I'll explain what this is. This is, think of it as the disaster management committee for a region. So you've got fire and rescue, police, Public Health England, county councils, everybody who might be needed if there's a disaster. So they have this forum, and they collaborate to tackle disaster. So if you think about it, we had Brexit coming up and the pandemic. So they needed support, and they contacted the university in May. So the university put my name forward because that's what I do. I do a lot of, aside from simulation, I do facilitation with groups of stakeholders. And they needed support in running their meetings virtually so they could come to solutions, because obviously they couldn't meet, and we're talking about a lot of organizations, and they had to make important decisions. So I worked with the gold level command and the silver level command, and we ran 3 workshops. I worked with Antuela Taco on this, and a PhD student as well. And we wrote 3 reports, and we supported them. And we came to stop because, I don't know if you know, here in Kent, we had our own version of the virus, which we exported around the world. The one that gave us this last lockdown. So they had to stop to focus on that because they were working 12-hour days. But what I wanted to kind of say here is that collaborations can come within your institution if you're well networked, if they know about your work. So how to take the next step? And I think this has been covered. You've got to be able to say what you do in plain English. If you use fancy words, and if you try and explain it like you would to a journal editor, they're not going to be interested. You've got to kind of say, I'm going to help you make money by doing this. Like, you've really got to translate it so they are interested in what you have to offer. If you are on the very hard OR kind of spectrum, and I used to consider myself that way because I was a simulation modeler, you would benefit from either having collaborations with people that are on the softer side or getting a little bit of experience yourself, and you can. I was like that, and I can do the soft OR, and I've kind of helped others do that. So it just means that you may have to collaborate with somebody for a period of time to get those skills. I would encourage you to do so. This has been covered. Network. I would say don't do it alone. I think it's better to be to work alongside other academics initially, because there's always something, there's always going to be a moment where you're going to not know what the next step is, and you need those conversations. You need somebody to talk to, and you need to just check if what you're doing is right. So I would encourage you to work with other people, at least at the beginning. Try and speak to sort of people within your organization, and you're going to have research services, you're going to have enterprise units. Talk to them, make sure they know what you can do, and it might take a while, but they'll definitely come round and link you up at some point. Don't be afraid to approach companies. Be audacious like I was and go knock on doors if you have to. You'll get a few rejections, but that's fine. That's all part of the experience. And make sure that when you do these collaborations, you talk about them afterwards, not just in academic journals, but put up a sort of article in your university website. See if you can get into the impact magazine of the OR Society. Try and explain things in a different way. And it's quicker to do this than it is to get through to a journal article. So sometimes these can lead to work quicker than your articles. And let's face it, people in industry are not going to read an academic article. So what I want to end with is something that I have found has worked for me. And this is maybe regardless of your skill set, this is maybe the main bit of advice that I have. Be you. Like, don't try and hide away your personality, your values, who you are, because you're working with other people and they need to know what you're like, because this could be months together of talking to each other. They've got to be passionate about you as well. So don't hide who you are. And sometimes a lot of the information they're going to tell you is sensitive and maybe a little bit embarrassing to them. So they've got to know that you're a human being and that you are not maybe perfect either. So use humor, do whatever it takes so they can see you for who you are. So that's not going to be covered in any of the journal articles, but I think it works for me. So, and one final thing, and I've kind of recently started this, and it's not so relevant to the talk today, but I just wanted to put it out there. I'm part of the Women in OR group, and every time I get asked to support, either whether it's early career researchers or women or whatever, it's something that I'm very much into. And I've just started a Facebook page, Mentoring Women in Academia. It's not specific to OR women, but just handing out advice like be yourself. So if you want to join, link up, find it and link up with me. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kathy. That was really great. I'm doing my clap. My single clap on its own, sorry. I can see lots of other people putting the emojis out though. So and somebody added the link to Impact Magazine as you were chatting as well. So hopefully people can find your Eurostar article, which I can say is a really good article. I remember reading that myself. So yeah, great talk. So just whilst people find time to put their questions in the chat or indicate that they have a question, I'll start with my own. So one of the things that I caught onto there was that you keep in contact with your collaborators. Do you find that they come back to you over time? And if you do, then how do you balance new collaborations and old collaborations, a bit of both, if you know what I mean?
Actually, there's a particular hospital that I worked with over like a 10-year period on different things, and it was almost the same group of people minus plus other people in collaborations. And it started off with supervising an MSc project, and it was just modeling an outpatient unit and then presenting the results. They loved that. And they said, actually, we have a different problem. We've got an MDT meeting, so nothing to do with simulation, and it's just not going very well. So that was more soft OR, so I helped them with a workshop, and then I visited them again after a few years to look at the same MDT meeting, and we had another workshop, and then we wrote it up as a paper, and we could see the changes. And I think that's where I kind of want to encourage you. You have to have these more personal relationships for them to get to know you and come back to you. I have to say, at the moment, I am at the point that I am probably too busy and I can't keep things up. But now I'm in a position where I try and this will happen to you as you progress. You'll get PhD students, you'll get RAs, and you'll spread things around. And if you have collaborators, they've got to lead things too. So as your PhDs become postdocs and early career researchers, you get them to lead things and then you support them. So things change.
Yeah, no, I think that was a really nice response. Thank you. I think I actually saw a talk not that long ago that was about developing trust with a partner and allowing that to help. I can see there's a question, so I'll come to Laura in a second. But do you think that it was the fact that they trusted you as a collaborator and as somebody to go to that helped to keep that collaborating going on further and further?
Yes. Yes, I think it did. And I'm the sort of person who speaks their mind. Like, I'll say a terrible rude joke in a meeting and I won't hold back, so they can really see who I am. And I think that helps because, and if I've had funding, I've also made sure that there's been catering, so we've had other opportunities to talk. So I think you've got to think about it as a collaboration with them, not just on the research, but they've got to really trust you, and you've got to do it in different ways.
Okay, cool, thank you. Laura, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Kathy. Just want to say thanks very much. That was a really great talk. I found it really interesting. I wanted to ask about your experience in working with, different application areas. I saw that you have a lot of work in different areas, and how you find it working, for example, with the hospital as opposed to working with a company like Eurostar.
There are differences, and the difference is quite often relating to power and how power is distributed. It's much more distributed, in my opinion, in the public sector as opposed to the private sector. So you have to make sure you've got people on board, a lot of people on board, and they've all got to agree to the action plan if you want any implementation. In the private sector, it's a little bit more hierarchical. So if you've got that senior level command to agree, they will filter things down for you in a different way. So that's one of the key things I have found. And also in the public sector, you have a lot of people that move jobs quite frequently, and that can be disruptive.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, we've got just one last question that's come up in the chat, so we'll cover that quickly. So Yusan asks, have you got any recommendations about carrying out impact case studies in the healthcare sector? Have you had any challenges you've experienced?
Well, I have to say that I think people moving in their roles is the biggest challenge. That you start off and then the kind of person who's leading that part can be changed 2 or 3 times as you do the project. I don't know. It has become a little bit worse in recent years than the past, and that's probably the biggest challenge. And I think you've got to build impact into your study. You've got to be more strategic when you're designing your study. So that would be my advice. Don't think of it as an end activity, but think, how can I embed it? What are the unusual ways that I could potentially embed this? How can I check that they're going to use it? And my view, and this is why I'm telling people, try and get a little bit of facilitation experience, a little bit of soft OR, because you've got to talk to people, you've got to talk to groups, so you need facilitation, and that can help move things along for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thanks again to Kathy for her talk. Do you mind unsharing your slides now, Kathy, and we can just so Anne can set up, and we'll say thank you to Kathy again. So yeah, and are you all right to share your slides? Yep. Oh yeah, we can see them now. Perfect. Oh, this just looks so different to other people sharing. I've not seen this before, and it looks really nice. So.
Okay, so shall I get started? All right. Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. From my side, also a few more thoughts on collaboration with industry. So a few of those thoughts are going to mirror what we have heard so far already. But I'm actually going to start with a slightly different view, namely by, first of all, looking not only at the advantages, but also at the disadvantages of working with industry. Because at least in my experience so far, whilst there are certainly lots of benefits to be found, there is also a bit of a risk there. Come to that on the next slide. So just briefly regarding myself and my background. So I've been mostly working on optimization related topics, especially in price optimization, but also generally transport optimization applications. So that's usually what I'm focusing on. So in terms of industry collaborations over the past, 12, 13 years, something like that, what I would suggest first of all is actually to reflect on the following. So in the sense of, do we actually want to pursue the potential opportunity or not? Because there are certainly a number of cons in terms of especially the time that you would be putting in this. So as soon as there is a company or public partner involved, some actual real application, there's no question that it's going to cost a lot of time. And this time is being spent, for instance, first of all, on finding the people clearly, also retaining access to them, because as I believe Kathy has just also said, people are often moving along, so you might lose your main person that has been supporting the project so far. And, it takes a bit of effort to ideally get to know several people so that you have got a stable relationship with that partner. Communication difficulties have been also mentioned already. So I got myself also quite a bit of a story on that, in the sense that when I was, as a PhD student specifically, attending some conference of some practitioner society, I was giving there a talk to revenue managers, and I thought, okay, I've already reduced the level of my presentation to something that they surely should understand, because they're revenue managers, they're exactly in that domain that I did my PhD on. So I had this slide up there with that dynamic program definition without the math. So I thought, okay, since I have expressed it essentially in words, that should be fine. And people were laughing because they just found it so ridiculous, that because these guys have been just clicking buttons, they've been just using the software, and the optimization that takes place in that software behind the scenes, they had no clue about and also didn't care about. And so I wasn't aware of that. So that was a good example of a communication failure which was, yeah, a little bit awkward, but anyway. So that's basically regarding communication difficulties. Legal issues, so IP ownership can be a bit of an issue. So I know, for instance, of a case where a company had been saying, okay, we have got already some budget agreed for yeah, financing this PhD studentship, for instance. And the only issue that remained for the contracts to be signed was just to agree between the university and that company partner on the IP ownership, and they did not manage to do so. In the end, it fell apart. The money was there, but simply over IP issues, yeah, it fell apart. And NDA likewise. So I spent so on one project, it took more than 3 months just to get that NDA signed, because the lawyers from this case was the University of Warwick were then constantly exchanging emails with the lawyers from that company, and they just couldn't agree on things, at least not for a long time. So that's also something to be aware of if you're setting up a collaboration and you have got the context and everything, that just the time that it takes to get well, all the agreements in place so as to get to the data can be quite, yeah, can take quite some time. Well, and at the end of the day, for that penultimate point here regarding the yeah, collaborations and, well, more pure disciplines, in the sense of if you're working on, yeah, the more pure side of OR, in the sense of more towards pure mathematics, I do think that there are people out there, unfortunately, that believe, well, collaboration is really not that important, because you should rather focus on that clear and pure and nice optimization problem, whatever. So not that I would share that view, but I do think that that view is out there. So as such, it can be a bit of a detriment if you're, well, kind of investing a lot of time in all these things, time which you maybe not then have available for more academic work. And finally, I feel that well, one needs to be acutely aware of the fact that industry typically seems to be interested, well, kind of intuitively, I guess, in kind of tangible solutions to their problems, and not just the approach, like, okay, so you could tackle this problem this and that way. So this, yeah, that's great. That's already a first step. But ultimately, many would like to see some sort of prototype that they could already build on to roll out, or at least in some sort of sandpit environment, to have then yeah, something to build on. And developing a prototype, well, that's not really something that we are being trained for, right? So we're not, at least most of us, I guess, are not trained software engineers. I come back to that point a bit later. But so this that's a bit of a, yeah, conflict, so to speak. If on the one hand, one wants to focus, at least to some extent, also on what really creates a lot of value for academic publications. And on the other hand, there is the drive of the business to really tackle very detailed yeah, problems with lots of, yeah, things which are not academically perhaps then that interesting because of all the yeah, nitty-gritty detail that doesn't require any additional methodology. But well, that detail might be what makes it or breaks it for industry, right? So that's something to be aware of. However, on the plus side, well, I guess you're aware of, yeah, most of these, if not all of these positive aspects. Right? So in particular, ref impact cases have been mentioned already. I assume that you will be familiar with the promotion criteria at your university. So like at the University of Warwick, where I was previously, one of those criteria that was used in order to climb up towards professor explicitly had been related to impact, and they characterized the different levels of achievement within that criterion. And well, in order to score high there, well, having a collaboration with industry that bears fruit, that certainly would be rather helpful. So I just was saying that the, well, impact on academic papers depends. So it can clearly strengthen academic papers. As Kathy was saying earlier, it really can help quite a bit having a nice collaboration there. But yeah, so it depends a bit, I would say, on how exactly in which field you are, etc. Well, strengthening proposals, I guess, is another obvious one. This one, I think, actually surprised me a bit initially, I must say, because then we engage.
Oh, I don't. Has on pause for everyone else also?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I can't hear either.
Okay, that's fine. We'll just give him a second. It might have just crashed there. He doesn't seem to be coming back.
Do you want to try sending him an email, Lucy, and say if he wants to disconnect and connect again, or we could move?
Yeah. Just I'll send him a really quick email. Oh wait, he's stopped sharing. So
yeah, I think.
Aha.
Oh
yeah.
You can see you
I just realized, I think I just had been kicked out, probably with my internet connection or something.
Yeah, you froze for a second, but you were on the point of discovery of new research topics.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, so in terms of discovery research topics, I do think that this is one of the biggest advantages, really, but because only via these collaborations one may discover things that you can't see in the academic papers, things that might actually really make the main difference in practice. And yeah, so this is quite exciting stuff. In terms of that penultimate point, so the industry contacts. So especially at the very beginning, so whilst being PhD student and then during my postdoc phase, I was particularly keen on pursuing collaborations, really to have a backup plan, in the sense that for some reason, my academic aspirations might not really work out for whatever reason, but that then one has got some backup plan in terms of some companies that one possibly could jump onto. So that was, in fact, at least for me, another driving force during the early career stages. But against this background, against these pros and cons, so my main advice before engaging, first of all, with some player in industry would be to really reflect on what exactly you would be getting out of this, in the sense of, is it more something that essentially gets you paid? I mean, there might be essentially a consultancy project, or is it something or ideally that also provides academic value to you, in the sense of that it's really a novel problem in some way, or that it might generate great insights, right, that could be published. And so I, at the time, had been specifically just looking for projects with academic value, in the sense of that I'm really convinced that it's advisable to reject projects that seem not having overly much potential to really help you along with the publications, because that's, at least assuming that you are aiming for an academic career, apparently, then I think, this is really, the important thing to do, to be clear what sort of thing might be coming out of that. Even for that might somewhat change, as I just said, but with the discovery of new projects, still, I think that's important. That also shapes how to approach the company, in the sense of when they are when they're asking you what exactly you would require from them, etc., so that you know exactly then what that will be. So in the sense of that, presumably wouldn't necessarily be funds, but it might be this and that kind of data or insights of some sort. In terms of timescales, I think Miguel touched on that already. So I would also advise against projects that they have got a very keen interest in seeing resolved very soon, because this will necessarily put a lot of pressure on you to actually deliver very quickly. And I don't think that as academics we are being trained to work like consultants and with a very quick turnaround produce something, right? Because the way that consultants typically work is to provide some solution that kind of works 80%, and that's fine. That gives already essentially what the client wants. But as an academic, clearly, if your focus would be on the is on the academic value, you want ideally something close to the 100%, so to speak, and that takes some time. And as such, so I always tried to look at projects that are being planned for the medium or long term for that company, so that one is not putting oneself under too much pressure, and that it's also clear to them that I'm not there as a consultant, but I'm there more as a, how do you want to say that, as a scientific advisor or something like that. Okay, so this is kind of related to that last point. So at least for me, so others might be thinking differently about that, but at least for me, I like to also let the partner know at the beginning already that the intention is kind of to operate at an arm's length, as I was writing here. So essentially meaning that I'm not going to be there solving every detailed problem for them, but it's more about getting them this methodology, for instance, for some prototype of something like some optimization problem or something. But it wouldn't be a prototype that would be deployable clearly for their operations, would be far from that. But it could serve as a first blueprint to build one. So that's kind of, that's kind of what I usually try to clarify right at the beginning. And one thing that I found really exciting when I was for a while at the Alan Turing Institute as a fellow there is this concept of the research engineering group. And I believe that some universities are also building or have already built similar teams within the university. So namely, the idea there is that you have got some software engineers and data scientists usually acting as a central pool of resource that are attracting funding from different sources, from different projects around the university, or in this case, the Turing Institute. And so they collaborate on the one hand with you as an academic, on the other hand, with some client in industry, for instance. Right? And so they could then, for example, develop some prototype which is already fairly detailed, which is fairly capable because they're trained software engineers, based on that kind of framework that you provide them. Right? So this, I think, is a really nice solution to that issue of us not being software engineers, and they're kind of then sitting in the middle. Well, it's more like a triangular relationship, really. So I think this is a really nice thing, but apparently the extent to which one might have access to this might be somewhat limited. But do ask around whether maybe at your university you might have something like that. So I think at Warwick, for instance, they also had a small group like this, but at least I believe it wasn't yet really scaled up to some extent, at least like 2 years ago. Right. So just coming to the end soon. So in terms of how to find suitable contacts, so I mentioned the practitioner society. So this is something certainly I would recommend. Practitioner magazines that we mentioned already. Alumni are always a good source to contact. Innovate UK had been mentioned. So specifically there I would like to highlight the catapults. So they are doing often some events. If you register for those events, that might be quite a good starting point to get some contacts with companies specifically for that domain. This I mentioned already. Partnerships at the university apparently might also be helpful to opening doors. And in terms of first contact, I think analytical teams are usually the ones who have got an open mind to us, or because apparently they are the closest content-wise with their work. But they also tend to have, especially for large corporations, they tend to have somewhat limited power. So that's something that I encountered for retailers, for instance. that the analytics team was really supporting it and really tried their best, but they didn't get support from top down. So yeah, that's unfortunately it. Right, and then winning the interest. So I would, well, essentially, I think this just echoes what Kathy was already saying, right? So in terms of focusing on business value rather than on academic value. So this is easily said, but much more difficult really to put in practice. So my main recommendation there would be to try to start out small. So, well, if you have got somebody that you met at a conference or something, or you saw somewhere else, if you have established that contact, maybe just to invite that person along to give a guest lecture and then have a chat with that person to find out more, what are their main pain points, what are they worried about, what are they working on, or maybe to offer an MSc project, as we also heard earlier. So this could be a great starting point. Also not directly to say, oh, how about we do this big project together? I mean, this is not likely to work. And to be clear on what we want from them. And since I'm, I think, quite a bit behind time, just to wrap it up very briefly, during the project, just remember to collect evidence of impact. Well, and in particular, this last point I would like to highlight again. So I think either Miguel or Kathy have been mentioning this, and I think it's really important to indeed, after awards such as
Oh, I think we've lost Arne again there. We'll just give him another couple of seconds to come back, because I can see that there's an interesting question in the chat for him. So we'll just give him a second. It's okay. We do have a little bit of room to maneuver today in terms of panel session, etc. And the networking session. So we won't run out of material time. Okay, hopefully we can bring Arne back. Maybe actually one of Miguel or Kathy, you could comment on the question that's in the chat. So the question in the chat is, oh, we might have got Arne back now, but that is, in your experience, are industrial collaborators ever highly motivated to see solutions to their problems published in research? Oh, Arne's back now. So do you want to finish off quickly, Arne? Sorry about that. You seem to lose connection again.
Oh, okay. So I didn't even realize that. So just basic now when I finished the presentation. Okay. So when when did I lose connection?
We have a quick question if you want to answer that from somebody. So Rob, who is one of my colleagues from Lancaster, asks, in your experience, are industrial collaborators ever highly motivated to see solutions to their problems published in research articles? And if so, do they usually assist with writing, preparation, submission of papers in your experience?
Yes, it depends, but so I think here this, well, keeping at an arm's distance really helps, because so, well, for instance, with one online retailer, we have been writing, I think 2 papers actually, and they were quite okay simply by, first of all, having the NDA in there, so just as a legal safeguard, but then we just provided them with the final draft of the paper before submission, had somebody look through that. A few things have been removed that were deemed commercially sensitive, but otherwise, because the model didn't go into all that details, I think Miguel also was saying that earlier, but so as long as one is not going down to the detailed level that really makes it work at the company, then I think that's fine. And as for co-authorship, it really depends. So like this company specifically did not to be mentioned, so clearly they didn't have anyone then as a co-author. So others, like Infineon, for instance, we're working with at the moment, they're completely happy to have one of their guys on the paper there, and it really depends.
Okay, thank you. And we didn't get a chance to thank Arne for his presentation, so let's do that now. Thank you so much. And thank you again to all our speakers. I think we're going to go into our panel session now just because of time. So, so the panel session is basically where we're going to allow you guys to ask questions to the speakers and to our fourth panelist who I haven't introduced yet, which is Matt Butchers. So Matt, would you like to introduce yourself quickly before we actually start off our panel session?
Absolutely. So hopefully you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Matt Butchers. I work for an organisation called KTN. We're partly funded by government to do the connection piece between researchers, business, government, etc. And we're measured on our ability to do that. And I've been working there for a fair number of years, looking after mathematical sciences as a discipline, and I've spent time with EPSRC helping them on their maths in business strategy.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks very much. So now we'll go straight into the questions. So I've got some pre-prepared questions from what you guys sent in prior to the event. So we'll start off with them, and then if there's any more at the end, or if anything interesting comes up as we go, just pop it in the chat and we'll try and get through everything. So I'm going to start off with just some quick fire questions. So in your opinion, what is the main merit and challenge of working with industry? So we'll go to Kathy first on that one. Just maybe one merit, one challenge. What are the main ones?
I think pre-pandemic, they had the money to implement solutions. I don't know what's happened after the pandemic, so that was the merit. I think the challenge is the timescales. They want things done very quickly, and luckily, when I spoke about the Eurostar situation, the RA was full-time there, so we could get things done very quickly. So what was the next bit?
That was it, just a merit and a challenge. So yeah.
Oh, I've done it.
We'll go to Miguel next. What do you want to add?
Well, Arna had a great slide on that, but from me, the ones that would come to mind is on the positive side, the fact that they do the collaboration with industry exposes you to problems that are very interesting and challenging, and you may never come across otherwise. And on the challenging side, I think communication, which was already mentioned several times, is key. And all this, unaligned objectives, unaligned motivations, keeping the connection, keeping the champion even when they move, and so on. This whole broad aspect of how do you keep the communication open with the partner can be quite a challenge.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds great. Do you want to add?
Well, I think Miguel essentially summed it up, so that's exactly what I would have said. So,
okay, I think so. Matt, you've probably seen hundreds of these. Do you want to say something that you've seen as a merit and a challenge of working, collaborating between industry and academia?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's worth pointing out that even short interactions with industry, using the word industry quite broadly to mean any profit-making company or government, can be career transforming. And there's anecdotal evidence and borrowing examples from colleagues that I know who have engaged decades ago on 1 week short projects which have really defined their research for decades. So that's in terms of merit. Challenges, to build on what's already been said, I think finding that contact or that project that's going to provide you long-term mutual reward is time consuming. I think you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find that one that's really going to be working for everybody for the long term.
Yeah, I think that's actually, as a nearly career researcher myself, I do feel like that's quite a challenge. So yeah. Actually, before we go really deep into the panel session, if everyone wants to, show their videos at this point, because it's more going to be a discussion, I'm happy for everybody to do that. So do show us that you're there if you and communicate with us if you like. So. Okay, so kind of on the same vein, actually, I'm going to come to Matt first about this question. So this was a question about how you approach industry, an industry where you think you might be helpful, but you've currently got no contacts in that industry.
Yes, that's a really hard and important one. And I think, first of all, it's useful to remember that industries are generally not looking for solutions to problems that they don't have. So approaches do need to be on their terms and around their needs. So if you think you have something useful, unfortunately, industries are not always very good at promoting what it is that they do need. But what you can do is read up on what's happening generally in their sector. So, for example, what are the important drivers in an industrial sector which you might be able to pin your offer onto? For example, digitization and automation in manufacturing, or personalization in healthcare and food and drink. Maybe could be some long-term trends that you could pin your offer onto. Now, these R&D priorities and roadmaps would most likely be collated and published by industry bodies or trade associations. See, for example, Jürgen Meyer's Made Smarter review a few years ago, or the Food and Drink Federation's areas of pre-competitive research. So these documents can help set out pre-competitive research areas that need to be addressed by the sector, and can be good to start a collaboration, a conversation on. And when you have that offer that is tailored, then this can open doors. And again, knowledge intermediaries, which have been mentioned by various speakers, can then help connect into those companies when you've got this clear offer. And when connecting with a new contact, you might want to think about starting small. And I know I did say this, start small with a relationship, a small project, which the industry perhaps doesn't have to pay much for or pass over too much sensitive information. But I do take Miguel's point about doing everything for free and need to avoid becoming a cheap service which undercuts consultants in the private sector. As Ali said, that's not where you want to be positioning yourself. But a summer project, a multi-day study group, for example, which can de-risk this initial interaction, and then grow this engagement into something like a KTP, which Kathy mentioned, or a large-scale collaborative research and development call. Yeah, I think that would be my advice. I mean, it's a huge question. I'll probably dig into that a little deeper.
No, that's great. Thank you, Matt. I mean, in a personal experience, oh, so Miguel's put his hand up. Do you want to speak, Miguel? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Matt was saying, which I totally agree with. I was thinking of an example of a relationship that I built with Hydro-Quebec in Canada when I was at the university there. And the way it started was by having a couple of MSc projects. Now, they're a little bit more than the UK MSc. They last closer to a year rather than 3 months. But the basic idea was, give us something to look at, right? We didn't ask for money. We didn't ask for anything upfront other than a bit of time. Tell us about the problem, and you know, the students will do their MSc or their masters working on it. And that was the starting of a relationship that 5 years later led to a major setup with an industrial research chair, which was a program that existed in Canada to support research. So it doesn't just happen overnight, and you have to find ways that for you, getting back also to the point of how much time you can put into it, are relatively cheap in time and allow you to build a relationship while keeping your academic side going so that your career doesn't suffer.
Oh, thank you. I think that was really, interesting contribution. So does anybody else want to add on to that from Kathy and Arne? No? Okay. Okay, so that was a really good
Lucy,
question. So I think, oh yeah, do you want to come and get
that? Just on Miguel's point, I think that's absolutely right, but it's also worth making sure you tot up how much that would have cost them, that initial interaction, for the next time, so that they do know there is a value associated with this interaction, and they cannot keep coming back for free, and that, you know, that's understood from the start.
Yeah, it's good to hear about both sides, actually, like the personal side of actually having something like that come about. And I know that I've got master's students each summer myself, but I've never really thought of using them in that way of opening a door to a collaboration before. So that's really an interesting idea.
Okay. Add to this. Sorry, just one quick comment regarding the payment thing. So I think at least one advantage of actually not being paid is certainly that one is not under so much pressure, but because at the end of the day, we can always say, well, I'm not being paid, so what do you expect? But so as such, so whilst I fully agree that one shouldn't just give everything away for free, but if it's of academic value to me, then I actually, at least I personally would be quite prepared to say, look, I'm okay. So if there is no money for myself, that's fine, as long as you know, I'm getting that academic thing that I otherwise wouldn't get, like this data or something like that. And then with this understanding of that, for that reason, because I'm not being paid, you know, I'm okay to work at a somewhat more distance than otherwise perhaps they would expect me to do. Because I also know of some colleagues, they had been paid quite a substantial amount for a project, and they really had asked them to work for it. I mean, they basically treated them like some McKinsey consultant or something, expecting them to work through the nights and so on. So that was not a pleasant experience for them, I think. So just as a quick comment on that.
I do think that yeah, that's a good point. I suppose it's a balance, isn't it, between the two. I think the second question actually is very related, so I'm going to come to Miguel on that. This person asks, what is good practice in maintaining a healthy collaboration? Do you want to say something? Oh, you're muted.
Sure. Yeah. That's a very important question that can take a very long answer as well. Two points that come to mind that I think are particularly important to maintain a healthy relationship as part of one or more collaborations with the company is to always keep in mind what their point of view is. And this has come up already more than once. You have your own priorities, your own pressures, your own criteria for promotion. They have their own priorities, their own pressures, their own criteria for promotion, and those are not aligned. So you have to always find a way to keep in mind their perspective and find a way to get a kind of win-win solution, so that they see that you understand how things work from their side, and they'll be more willing to engage and continue collaborating. And generally what you really need to work on is communication, and this was Kathy was mentioning, of develop those skills to facilitate, to communicate, to just generally keep the channels open and the understanding open, and certainly be yourself. I think that's an excellent piece of advice.
Yeah, I do think that's really good advice. Does anybody else want to come in on that one? You come in? No, that's okay.
Well, from my side, I would just reiterate that I think it's important to have several contacts, because people are changing so often, either within the organization or even beyond. So it's actually really frustrating having just built up that contact, and then the team leader goes somewhere else, and you're like, okay, great, got to start from scratch again.
I think actually, because that's happening more regularly now, just in general, people are dealing with that throughout their PhD when they're working with industrial clients and things like that as well. So it does seem to be something that we have to adjust to as a research community. The fact that there is quite a lot of turnover of staff in all sectors, really. So yeah, that's a good point.
So, I mean, Lucy, I might add that could also be seen as an opportunity, that if you keep track of these people, you'll be exposed to new problems in new industries and new companies. So just because that person's left, that doesn't mean the end of the relationship. It means a different relationship. So try and track them and keep them in your extended network.
Oh, that's a really good point. Like it might be a new lead into a new sector that you've not actually worked in before. That seems very, very sensible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So got a few questions on skill requirements, really. So I'm going to come to Kathy on this first one. So what would you do if an industrial contact reaches out to you for collaboration in something that's not 100% in your comfort zone?
Well, the 100% is the ideal. It's never 100%. But it depends how far down that is, because if I know that what I can offer is 80% and I can find another person for the other 20%, then I'm happy to go with it. If what they want is really outside of what I can do, then I make it very clear what I can offer, and I don't take on projects that I have nothing to offer. So I think you have to have quite a high moral code, because it's not just your time, but you don't really want to just to have that collaboration to go and engage in something that you really can't deliver. So that would be my advice, to see how far down that scale you are.
Okay, and do you think it's always obvious on the outset that whether you're the right person to talk to, and what do you do if you've been talking to somebody for a while and then realize that actually it might not be you, it might be somebody else that's the better person to work with? Would you always pass it on, or try and just go with the flow? Or
I work with, as I said, I like to work with other people, and I don't always have to lead things. So if I felt that it really was, for example, they came and they wanted an optimization model, after some conversations, I would really be passing it on. And then I know that this optimization person might pass on something to me in time. I think you have to have this collaborative relationship with your colleagues, and you have to have you have to be working with other academics and have this relationship of trust that I'll give you something. I'm not necessarily expecting anything back, but ideally in the future, think of me if something comes your way. So that's the way to think about it. But just don't take something on if you can't do it. So that's because you'll just ruin your reputation. You won't be able to deliver, and it'll just be an embarrassment at the end. So you're better off not going down that route.
It brings a quote to mind that no academic is an island. There we go.
Yeah.
So we should remember that. Okay. So the next question, slightly related to skills as well. So what are the key soft skills the panel see as critical to successful collaboration? So Arne, can I come to you on that one?
Yeah, so hopefully my connection holds for more than 5 minutes for a change. That would be nice. So sorry about that. Yes, so as for the questions, I think a couple of the soft skills have been mentioned already, but so like especially communication skills being at the forefront, I suppose. Yeah, and generally, I think, well, Kathy also mentioned skills on the software side would be certainly helpful to set things up because yeah, usually I think a general rule of thumb is that industry people, even those in the analytical teams, know yeah, much less about yeah, OR and quantitative things than one would perhaps think initially that they should do, perhaps. So as such, I think it's always a good idea to start off with the kind of simplest plain English explanation of what you want to do, and kind of feel your way forward to what extent reaches the to what extent they have got yeah, deeper expertise in a particular field, rather than by directly losing them. I guess that's one of the main things, really.
Anyone else want to add to that? Oh yeah, do you want to add, Kathy? Yeah.
Because this really fits with my research, which is very much about engaging stakeholders. I do have participative simulation, which is about linking groups of stakeholders in the simulation modeling process. And we're doing more research at Kent. Actually, Shima, who's here, she's kind of finishing off her PhD, and she's looked at facilitated optimization. So working with groups of stakeholders on optimization sort of problems. And this is because there is clearly a need for us to work with groups, and we can't have it always as an art. We need to make it more of a science. So we need to have a process that we don't have to reinvent every time, that we can just follow and just engage with them, and really only just worry about the modeling side, because the other bit will work. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, I think it would be good if both of the sides understood that as well. Just quickly, a shout out to Shima as well, who's organising the next Warren event. That's for ECRs. So if you do see that advertised, do check it out, because it looks like a great event through the OR Society. No, no worries. Okay, so just one more question on the skills side. So I think we actually touched on this a little bit in some of the presentations, but have you got any tips for effectively communicating something that's really theoretical to a client? And Miguel, can we come to you on that one?
Sure, yes. I've found that the best way to explain something, if you can make it work, is by giving an example. And I think that connects to the fact that generally as human beings, we learn by example. You know, you don't just give a nice fancy theory and people understand immediately. You have to do small examples and get the idea through. So I take it the same way, and I try to come up with an example. I try to understand enough of what people that I'm talking to do, to come up with some example that I think will connect to what they do. And even if the example is not quite right, that will probably get them to react and to sort of point out things that you haven't got quite right and so on. But just by fixing on something very simple and very specific, you get that communication going, and that helps a lot. And interestingly, that was something that helped a lot with a project that I did that was within the university some years ago. I was at the University of Waterloo, and we were looking at the whole process of how the co-op assignment of positions work. So Waterloo has this huge co-op program that places several thousand students 3 times a year into jobs that are part of their training. So it's a huge undertaking, and we can talk a lot about that. But the difficulty they were having was scaling up. Their processes just didn't scale up. And I was working on that with a colleague at Waterloo that is very much on the soft OR side of things, and he came up with this great analogy about how their process was analogous to something else that we all know in our lives, and then sort of exaggerated by saying, well, you know, you can do this with 1 person and 2 persons and 10 persons, but how do you do a party with 5,000 people? And they suddenly realized that these simple ideas that they had just didn't scale up. And their solution had been to just throw more and more people at the problem. And it just was not going step back and say, let's think about it from a system perspective. How do you set it up and how do you optimize it? But it all started with this very simple analogy of how do you run a party at home? And it just got the basic conversation going and the ideas across.
Yeah, that's a really great example. Thank you. Okay, well, because we've had a few discussions about that, I will just move on to the next question, which is one that I missed from previously, and it's a question for Matt, actually. So somebody asked, sent in a question about what the best way for a university is to make first contact in a business. Do you have anything you can say about that, Matt?
Yeah, and I guess it's a important point to know that it's not just an early career problem, it's probably a problem for any stage in your career. And Miguel's utopian vision of how it actually works is, if you take that approach, this passive approach to hoping someone's going to come to you, you're probably not going to get very far with it. And our old chief exec at KTM used to say to us that innovation is a contact sport and you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to network, you've got to go to partnership events, you've got to go face-to-face meetings when you can. And when myself and EPSRC and a few years ago put together a review on knowledge exchange in maths, we gathered evidence from a number of companies about how they initiated their collaborations, and around 80% of the responses, those collaborations were initiated through existing contacts, through a colleague, or through a network meeting. So in the absence of existing networks, you need a proactive approach to build this network, which is incredibly hard at the best of times, and even harder when everybody's sitting at home not being able to use their their network capital, which they may have spent years building up. But there are organizations that provide these informal meeting spaces for companies to share their problems, their pre-competitive problems, and researchers to share their capabilities. So I'll highlight a few. So I've probably got to, say my own organization, KTN, does exist to try and help facilitate that. But there are other organizations around the country. So there's the Isaac Newton Institute and their outreach arm, the Newton Gateway. ICMS up in Edinburgh, the International Centre for Mathematical Sciences, has a strong knowledge exchange element. So there are organizations that can help you create the spaces to kick off those initial meetings.
Yeah, that's great, thank you. Definitely from my experience of just a few of those, it's been really helpful. I'm definitely very early into my career, but I've already started to try and dabble a little bit in those meetings, and it's amazing who you can meet. And you see the same faces coming up at different events as well, which is quite, it's very interesting to start networking within this environment with people. Okay, so I think one of the questions, and this is quite a little bit on a different slant, so this is almost about the difference between collaborating with different sectors. So this question will go to Kathy again on how is collaboration different between public and private sector, if at all?
I don't think you can differentiate just so broadly on the sectors. I think it's every situation is different to each other. So each time you've got to approach it with a fresh set of eyes and be open to, you know, managing things differently. So just to give you an example, when I was doing one study with an obesity system, and that particular, so it was in the with the NHS people, and that particular group were in London, and they were used to having their meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning. So we had meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, I'm not sure I would do that now. It was a long time ago, but with other groups, they wanted their meetings in the evening. So even something as simple as that, you just have to see what is right for that organization. How do I make this work? And okay, I mean, I can't generalize and say when you're, because people are early career research is not related to age or your family situation or whatever. But if you have less responsibilities, you are more able to sort of do these, to put more into it and meet at 6 o'clock in the morning and do stuff like that. After a certain point, when there's family, there's other things, you just can't do it. So you have to see what can you do.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. I actually had thought that there would be I don't know, a difference between those two, that you but definitely the thought that everybody is completely individual, even from company to company, is interesting. So, okay. So
Yvette has her hand up, just to say. I think Yvette has her hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see. Oh, and we've got yes. Sorry, that.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Arne mentioned that he's better seen as a scientific advisor rather than a consultant because of the lack of software engineering side, from what I understood. So I have a background in computer science as well. So I do both the mathematics and the programming, and I find very few people can do both, but also I find it challenging to communicate with other programmers. So do you have any advice for people who are more focused on the computer science side, in particular about industry relations?
Do you want to answer that?
Well, I can try. So not being from computer science myself, it's a bit difficult.
Well, I guess it's a question to everyone.
Yeah, at least from my point of view, I think so. Even if you have got the skills to basically do both the theoretical methodology development as well as the implementation, I guess in your place, I would be asking myself whether you want to do it both, because I mean, it's going to be quite a big of a time commitment, right? And if there might be some sort of construct that you have got someone else to help you with the implementations, all the better if you also know quite a bit about that side. So it depends on your field, I guess, where the academic value is, right? So whether that would be more on the computer science side or more on the UR side. But that's where I would personally put my emphasis, and the rest I would try to kind of delegate, or basically through some sort of partnership to have that for somebody else, so to speak.
Thank you.
Miguel, looks like you have something to say on that as well. Did you?
Yes, I was going to answer Yvette's question, which is, what would you want to get out of the relationship? And that gets back a little bit to something that Anna mentioned. You know, are you looking for the opportunity to do a computing project? Are you looking for the opportunity to develop something else where maybe even if you have the computing skills, you'd actually rather have somebody else do the bulk of the computing, like some kind of research associate or some other technical person that can be also part of the project?
I think the question is that an easy jump? Is that possible to happen, going from more developer to delegating more developer tasks?
Oh, can you make the jump? Is that the question?
I mean, is it the thing people do?
Well, I think it's doable. I'm not I don't know how common it is. I mean, we're talking in an OR context, I think.
It's
In a
just
computer science context, you might get more responses to that. But
from a computer science perspective, there's a large drive towards programming and development, and research it's hard to stay in.
So but I think I still think that what it really needs, the real question I would ask is, what are you trying to get? Where do what's your objective in some sense? And part of it may be, you were just mentioning computing, the programming community, talking to the right community as well in some sense, which will help you towards that objective.
That's something I find, that there's not enough interaction between maths and computers, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen so far.
There are a lot of barriers even within mathematics, so that's also another challenge that we could talk to another day. We could have a whole event on that. But I agree. It's not easy.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question, Yvette. That was really, a really interesting debate. So I think what we'll do is leave because we want to have a little time for networking in this event. So we'll leave the panel session there, because the last two questions are quite similar to what we've already spoken about. So at this point, let's just thank all of our panelists again. Thank you everybody for joining in there. And just to say that the survey link is now, I'll get Carol to post it again, but the survey link to that, the survey is there for you to actually fill in. It's in the chat at the moment. So Carol, are we okay to move out into breakout rooms now? I don't know if you want to unmute and just tell people for the last 10 minutes that we're going to break out.
Yes, okay, so I've put we've got 3 rooms, and I think everybody, apart from Yvette and Lucy, I think I've managed to get everyone into a room. But Yvette and Lucy, I will ensure that I do guide you into a room shortly.
All right, thank you. All right, so just use this time to chat away, guys, and we'll, if you have to leave in the meantime, then thank you for joining us today, and we'll speak soon.